Good evening, everybody. It's 1 minute past 8 o'clock here in Japan. And so let's start this week's Monday Zen and Zazen class. Tonight I will talk about Suzuki Shunyu's Zen mind, beginner's mind. But before that, as always, let's sit together for half an hour. Thank you for joining. I don't know if anybody else of you is annoyed by this, but a couple of weeks ago, something changed at Zoom. Before, you could switch between original sound for musicians, which is convenient if you ring a bell like this, um, and noise removal, which is nice if you talk and it filters out the extra noise. And you had a button in the top right corner. You could just click on it, and to ring the bell, you would use the original sound. And then later, when I talk, I would put the filter on. And for some reason, Zoom removed that button. So now you always have to go to the audio settings. And it's a little bit of a pain in the ass, but I guess that it's only a small percentage of Zoom users that are affected by it. For some reason, Zoom doesn't seem to be bothered by it, although there's a small number of users complaining, like myself. Anyway, today I want to talk about Shunryu Suzuki's Zen mind, beginner's mind. I used quite some time to talk about the posture chapter. The next chapter is about breathing. And the following chapters, I don't want to talk about it sentence by sentence, because otherwise it will take quite a long while to talk about the whole book. But at first, let me read at least some of the sentences, some part of the text from that chapter. So this is the text that you can find on the internet. Breathing. What we call I is just a swinging door which moves when we inhale and when we exhale. That's a quote from the chapter. When we practice Zazen, our mind always follows our breathing. Here, Suzuki Shunryu says, our mind always follows our breathing, but I think most of you have experienced that actually the mind can be all over the place, and most of the time it's not following the breath. But I think the idea is, well, um, when the mind returns to the here and now and stays with the body, then at the center of this experience of the here and now is the breath. So if the mind is actually here and now, you feel the posture, you feel pain when there's pain, you feel hot or cold, and you also feel the breath. But again, most of the time, actually, our mind wanders off. But fortunately, after a couple of minutes or so, most of us realize, I've been thinking, and that's the time to return to here and now. When we practice Zazen, our mind always follows our breathing. When we inhale, the air comes into the inner world. When we exhale, the air goes out to the outer world. The inner world is limitless, and the outer world is also limitless. We say inner world or outer world, but actually there's just one whole world. In this limitless world, our throat is like a swinging door. The air comes in and goes out like someone passing through a swinging door. If you think, I breathe, the I is extra. So actually, in the moment you are breathing, there's only breathing. There's only breathing. You could also say, it is breathing. Because if you were breathing, then when you pass out, your breath would stop. At night, when you're asleep, your breath would stop. But that's not the case. At night, you breathe because you don't breathe. breathing happening. Breath is happening. If you think I breathe, the I is extra. There is no you to say I. What we call I is just a swinging door which moves when we inhale and when we exhale. It just moves. That is all. When your mind is pure and calm enough to follow this movement, there's nothing, no I, no world, no mind, no body, just a swinging door. When your mind is pure and calm enough to follow this movement, there's nothing, no I, no world, no mind, nor body, just a swinging door. Oh. For a moment, there was this question in my mind. So how about the breath? Is there also no breath? But if the mind is with the breath, sure enough, there would be breath. And if the mind is also with the physical posture, there would also be the body. Um, Probably what he's trying to say is all these concepts we have of I and the world, body and mind, all of these concepts, we let go of them and return to what actually is here in this moment. So it doesn't mean that you don't feel pain in this moment or you don't feel breathing in, breathing out. You exactly feel breathing out. When you breathe out, you feel breathing in. When breathing in happens, you feel pain. When there's pain, you feel an itch. When there's an itch, you feel dizzy. When you're dizzy, you feel tired when you're tired. But those are not concepts. I think that's the point he's trying to make here. It's not that you the world disappears, the I disappears, and I don't know. I think he's not talking about an LSD kind of experience or like passing out. You completely space out, at least in my mind. So then it's the complete opposite. We return from the spaced out state to the here and now. You return from the map to the point in the landscape where you actually stand, where your feet are. So when we practice Zazen, all that exists is the movement of the breathing. But we are aware of this movement. You should not be absent-minded. But to be aware of the movement does not mean to be aware of your small self, but rather of your universal nature or Buddha nature. To be aware of the movement does not mean to be aware of your small self, but rather of your universal nature or Buddha nature. I would like to comment a little bit on this. Actually, it's been a couple of decades, I would say more than 3 decades, since I last read Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. I think I was in my early 20s, and probably it was when I first arrived in Japan and I stayed for a couple of weeks in a small temple where Okumura Roshi, Shohaku Okumura, who's now living in Indiana, USA. He was at that time still living and teaching in Japan. And in the small temple where he lived, there was this library, and one of the books I found there was Zen Mind, Beginner's Mind. And I read the book and I loved it. And part of that was the books by D.T. Suzuki. There was always this promise of Satori, but nobody really knew what it is. The only thing that D.T. Suzuki said about it is you can't express it in words. You have to experience it for yourself. But compared to that, Suzuki Shunryu seemed so down to earth. He didn't present this invisible carrot. Here, try to get this carrot. He's talking about the posture here. He's talking about the breath that is a swinging door. But now, after more than 3 decades, and I read it again, there's also this, maybe it was just the time of the late 60s, this kind of spiritual blah blah, you could say. If you, well, of course, Suzuki Roshi doesn't want to do spiritual blah blah, but sometimes it sounds like the spiritual blah blah. Here, in the case of, it's not about the small self, it's about the universal big self. Um, so I would like to phrase what he is saying here the opposite way. Um, what he was saying was, if you follow the movement, that does not mean to be aware of the movement, does not mean to be aware of the small self, but to be aware of the big self. And that sounds, at least to my ears, a little bit like spiritual blah blah, universal self, Buddha nature. Um, and most people probably who heard that or read that in the book were kind of fascinated. Oh, I want to be aware of this big self. Where is it? So I would phrase it the other way around. If you want to be aware of your so-called big self, universal self, Buddha nature, it's very simple. Just be aware of the movement of your breath. There it is. Your universal self isn't out there somewhere above the clouds. The moment you feel pain, that self that's aware of the pain is the universal self. The moment you breathe out, the self that's aware of breathing out is universal self. And in the case of the quote here, it sounds a little bit mystical. To be aware of the movement doesn't mean to be aware of the small self, it means to be aware of the big self, universal self. I would phrase it the other way around. But be that as it may, let me continue for just a little bit more. This kind of awareness, so the awareness of universal nature, Buddha nature, this kind of awareness is very important because we are usually so one-sided. Our usual understanding of life is dualistic. You and I, this and that, good and bad. And I would add small self, big self, universal self is also just another example of this dualism. So let go of this idea. I need to be aware of my universal self. It's just another concept, just as the small self. Small self and universal selves are also just concepts we need to let go. But actually, these discriminations are themselves the awareness of the universal existence. What he's saying here is basically the moment you are lost on the map. For example, you follow Google Maps to get to your destination, and you're so absorbed by the screen of your iPhone that you run into a tree, for example. It's not that the moment that you look on the map, you're not in reality anymore. Of course, the moment your mind is on the map, you're still in reality. It's just that your mind is off. The moment you're discriminating, who is discriminating? Well, it's the awareness that's actually before dualism, but still. With this non-dualistic mind, we are able to make discriminations. And the point is to return one step before that, before we make discriminations, even the discrimination between big self and small self, the bad ego I and the good Buddha nature self. Okay, if you're Interested about the whole chapter, you will find later under the video, found a link. You can read through the whole chapter. What is interesting about the chapter is that Suzuki Roshi doesn't really go much into the details of breathing. With the posture, the physical posture, he was much more specific. And he said, well, to sit in the right posture in itself is enlightenment. For some reason, he doesn't talk about the right way to breathe. Um, when he talked about the posture, I said that I probably would explain it a little bit different from, for example, rather than say stretch your back, try to break with the skull through the ceiling or to support the ceiling. I would rather say allow your back to stretch itself. I would maybe less emphasize the you have to adjust your posture and rather say allow your body to find the right posture. Here in the breathing section, he's kind of emphasizing the non-doing aspect very strong. He says, well, there's actually no I that could do the breathing. It just happens. You don't have to adjust the breath. And I would maybe say, yeah, of course, that's right. But for example, one thing that you could say is you should aim at diaphragmal breathing. So what I often say is you drop the intestines. You drop the intestines, so when you breathe in, your belly moves out. When you breathe out, your belly contracts. If you're used to only breathing with the breast, at first it takes some time to kind of discover this feeling of diaphragmal breathing, but that helps to kind of lower the, how do you say, the center of gravity of your body. You lower the center of gravity, and diaphragmal breathing helps with that. Another detail that might be mentioned is breathing through the nose. Another detail, for example, an interesting difference to Ashtanga yoga. In Ashtanga yoga, you breathe with the breast, and the breath of breathing in and breathing out is ideally the same length. In Zen, usually breathing out is longer, but nobody tells you if it's supposed to be maybe twice as long or 3 times as long or maybe even 4 times as long as breathing in. But usually what people tell you, if they tell you about it at all, is you focus on breathing out. The reason for that is there's a certain tension in the posture as well, but probably relaxation and the release of energy in Zen is more important. Dogen Zenji talks about dropping body and mind, and people say that's an experience he had in China. Body and mind dropped off. I don't know when he had that experience, if he had it when he breathed in or if he had it when he breathed out. But I would guess probably when he breathed out. That's when you release energy. That's when this dropping off happens. It would surprise me if Dogen Zenji was breathing in and then body and mind dropped off in that moment. Another thing that you could say that I sometimes say when I have the time is you breathe out, or as Suzuki Roshi said, there's no I in that moment, but you allow your breath to go out. And then at the end, usually there's this impulse to breathe in instantly. But you can also discover this maybe split second, maybe half a second or so, when you have completely breathed out, but for half a second nothing happens, and then you breathe in again. And when your mind is really with the breath, you can enjoy that half second. You don't have to extend it. You don't have to stop your breath there and, how do you say, make it into a exercise. I'm gonna stop for 3 seconds, 5 seconds or so. But I find that quite, how do you say, enjoyable, that you breathe out and then you discover for half a second or so there's this quiet, total quiet. And then breathing in happens and breathing out happens again. Yeah, so it's a little bit surprising that Suzuki Shunryu says almost nothing about the details of breathing here, but actually that's in accord with Dogen Zenji. A couple of years ago, we talked about Fukan Zazengi, and Fukan Zazengi, Dogen Zenji also, he's talking about the physical posture in some detail, but about the breath, he says almost nothing except that you breathe through the nose. Um, And probably also part of the idea is body and mind are connected, but also body and breath are connected. So when you find the right posture and you settle in this posture, relax in this posture, you don't have to worry about the breath so much because you will find, or your breath will get adjusted. You don't have to do it. And often this idea, I need to adjust my breath. I need to control the breath. I have to do the breath. Um, doesn't improve the breath. Often it's not really a good idea. Letting it be the way it is and following the way it is often is the best thing you can do. Okay, so much from my side about the breathing chapter. If you have anything you would like to ask or share, you're welcome to do so. Any feedback from your side? Jan, please.
Well, I always will have some questions. So for today, I have some question. So it's like that. In order to make it easier to simply sit during Zazen with less mental attachments or worries, to what extent is it necessary to work in parallel on reducing cravings? For example, by internalizing the Buddha teachings or Kodo Sawaki's texts.
Um, I got the second part. To what extent it is,
So, so yeah, in order to simply sit during Zazen,
yes.
so with well, I understand that during Zazen it's good to have less mental attachments or
Mm,
worries. So, to what extent is good also to work in parallel
mm,
to reducing the cravings? So I understand that during doing Zazen, you reduce the cravings, but to
mm,
what extent is also good to work
mm, mm,
outside
mm,
the sitting on those
mm.
cravings?
I guess there's different approaches in different schools of Buddhism, but in Zen, I would say you don't have to work on reducing the cravings. When there are cravings like a strong desire, sexual desire, any kind of desire, hunger, whatever, or aversion. During Zazen, you remember something that somebody told you last week, and you get angry about it. Rather than say, now I first want to work on reducing that, you realize it's happening and you don't do anything about it. You don't play around with it, you don't try to reduce it. It's just like this itch, the physical itch or the physical pain. You feel it, you're aware that it's there, but you don't do anything about it. The same with craving. And when you try to work on it, I don't know, maybe you're successful, but often it's just like this itch. You start to scratch, and gets even worse. It drives you mad. But the moment you stop to scratch it and just let it be, it goes away over time. The same with the cravings. So at least in my tradition, from my teacher, I didn't learn any methods to work with the cravings. And from my experience, just let them be and don't react on them is the best way to work. So not work at all, so to speak. Andre, please.
Yes, what Suzuki Roshi wrote about this awareness, what is aware of this breathing.
Yes.
I think you said the same. You didn't say the opposite.
Hmm.
I looked at this sentence and he says this awareness is not your small mind, but your universal mind. And
Yes.
then later in your explanations, you said you would say the opposite, but then you said the same that this not some small mind and or a big mind, but there's only this Buddha mind. What is this awareness? It is already this. Or maybe I didn't get it right. I should see. I had a feeling you said the same, but you started your sentence with I would say the opposite. Can you remember?
Hmm. I do remember, yes. So he said to be aware of the movement. I think he's talking about the movement of the breath, the swinging door.
Yeah, yeah. So this is the
Means
awareness.
means not to be aware of the small self, but of the universal self, your universal nature, Buddha nature. And universal nature, Buddha nature sounds very nice, but also very mystical. A lot of people that hear it or teach it probably have no idea what does he mean. But I want to be aware of that. So I'm not supposed to be aware of my small self, but aware of big self. How do I do that? And that's when I said, well, I would phrase it the other way around. If you want to be aware of your true self, universal self, Buddha nature, whatsoever, there's a very simple way. Follow your breath, be aware of the pain, the itches, or we were just talking about the cravings. There's a craving in this right moment. You don't have to remove it so that you can finally become aware of your universal true self. But the moment you feel craving, you feel the craving. You don't work on it, you don't react on it, you don't follow it, you just let it be. So I don't deny what he's saying, I don't deny the message, but I would take the opposite approach rather than saying start with the breath and then you will reach your Buddha nature. I would say if you want to reach your Buddha nature, here, stay with the breath, stay with the craving, stay with the pain, stay with the itch. That's the big self that we talk about. You don't find it somewhere above the clouds.
Yes, and I understood this sentence of Suzuki the same way you explained it.
Okay, good.
He says the same, but you
Of
would
course,
say
of
the
course.
same, but the other way around. Now I get it.
Mm,
You don't say the opposite, but you say the same, but you would go from the other direction.
exactly,
I got it.
exactly.
Yeah.
Any other questions? Anything else you would like to share? It's already 9 o'clock here, so if you have no more questions, I would say let's meet again next week. That would be 22nd. Is that right? So shortly before Christmas. And next time we talk about Sawaki Roshi again. Sawaki Roshis to you. So I wish you a good week. Hope to see you again. And as always, also thank you to Schwan for hosting us here. And if you're interested in not just letting breath happen, but also work with the breath. Pranayama takes place, I think, every weekday. So also after this, 10 minutes past 9, was that right? Yes. Today, but also all the other weekdays. Schwanzan, it's not the same address like this. It's a different room. Maybe you can put it in the chat function if anybody's interested. Um, I think everybody who's attending this class is also invited to attend Schwann's pranayama, and pranayama is yoga breathing class. So wait for a couple of seconds and maybe she will put a link in the chat. Yes, there's the link. If you still have time and interested, you're invited. So thank you very much, Schwansan, for giving us this opportunity. Thank you, everybody, for attending and hoping to see you again next week. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Thank you.